Thanks for joining us this afternoon. This is the next in the series of webinars that the Energy Services Coalition has done or doing in support of the ESPC campaign by the Department of Energy. Today, the focus is looking at ESPC not only as a resilient model that has been in use for some time through ups and downs, political changes, all of that, but also sort of playing on the word of resilient, how it can be used to truly implement resiliency goals and objectives for different organizations. So with that, if you'll move to the next slide. So housekeeping today, this is a meeting format, so you can unmute and turn your camera on if you have questions, or raise your hand. We'll make sure we keep an eye out for those. Also, anything you have question-wise, you can drop in the chat, and we'll keep an eye on that as well. A recording of this training plus the slides that you'll see today will be provided to you. So a link through the recording and the slides. So you can have those as reference. There'll be links and such that you can click on later for follow-up. And then if you have colleagues that would have benefited from being here live but couldn't make it today, you can share that with them and they can view that later. So next slide. So introductions. I'm Doug Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Energy Services Coalition. And with me today is Chris Halpin. He is our technical expert and lead trainer. If you've attended the webinars before, you've heard Chris speak. He's an expert in all things ESPC, a long history, all sides of the business, serving as an owner's rep, as an engineer, as a measurement verification specialist. So you'll be hearing from Chris for most of the presentation once we've gone through the intros. Next slide. And a little bit again about the Energy Services Coalition. We're a public-private partnership really set up to help advance understanding and help educate different stakeholders about the value of energy savings performance contracting as a tool to achieve different energy and water, project outcomes. And obviously today the focus is on resiliency as well. We have local chapters, very active in many states, and encourage you to look into that more. And we are a training partner for the Department of Energy for the ESPC campaign. So next. Okay, so today's agenda is looking back a little bit, and again, a bit of a play on the word of resilient or resiliency. And that is that ESPC as a tool and as a construct for project delivery has been around for quite some time. And it has withstood the test of time. Again, funding, different sort of funding challenges, surplus of fundings, windfalls of funding on the finance side, different priorities, whether they be environmentally oriented or economic development, et cetera, and has been proven and refined over these decades into what we have today, which is really a proven mechanism to implement projects in a cost-effective way, engaging experts of all types in project delivery. So we're going to be going down, looking again at ESPC both from a resiliency standpoint as a program and a structure and a construct, as well as the resilient benefits that ESPC can deliver. So next. All right, so Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you
all right,
and let you take it from here.
All right, thanks, Doug. I appreciate a great introduction and start of our webinar today. I'm glad you all are joining us. I wanted to recognize Jamie Garrett, who's on the call here, is my partner putting this together. She's been a huge help as usual. So a little bit about the history of ESPC. So it's been around basically 50 years, right? Started in sort of the early 80s in a few states, Washington, Ohio, and a few others. It's been primarily aimed at the MUSH market. Actually, it was getting done in schools and hospitals and so on for probably 20 years before the federal government really started to do it. It originally started after the energy crises of the 70s and the realization that we had some pretty aging public infrastructure, right? Which unfortunately hasn't changed that much, which is why it's still very, very popular. What it really did for most public agencies is offer a risk-averse, budget-neutral financing mechanism, right, to overcome these barriers. And as all of you know, I see there's a lot of public folks on this call, as well as folks from ESCOs and other suppliers. Pretty much every public agency in this country has to follow sort of a low bid mentality of design, bid, build, right? And it ends up being relatively adversarial, and you end up getting things value engineered out, which is neither, right? And so ESPC was able to sort of get around most of that by, one, procurement, a lot of different things I've covered rather in previous webinars, but it really helped these agencies and has become probably the most important tool in the tool bag of a CFO, a director of facilities, director of engineering, whatever the case may be, for a, state agency, city, town, school district, county, whatever the case may be. It provided a ton of benefits, right? This budget-friendly modernization where you didn't have to go and, beg for more money to get things done and try to, keep things running with duct tape and baling wire, which has happened a lot. You get guaranteed results where the ESCOs actually assume performance risk and get paid for performance. Created a ton of jobs, and mainly technical jobs. And a lot of the ESCOs that do this tend to be sort of highly specialized general contractors and hire mostly local mechanical, electrical contractors, commissioning agents, cost estimators, mechanics, all kinds of different things. It really creates a ton of local jobs. It's created a lot of leadership around resilience, both facility-wide and out through whole communities. And we saw this when I lived in New England for decades, and we had, let's see, 600-year events in 1 year, right? So the math didn't quite work there, but it really led to a lot of things getting done differently through implementing microgrids and other resilience opportunities. And this has started to happen across the country. It's also created a lot of operational efficiency, reducing long-term costs, and really freeing up funds for core services, right? That's one of the biggest benefits out of all of this. And improving the environments, right? It has really helped. I've seen this, especially in schools, helping the learning environment with improved lighting, improved thermal comfort, allowing kids to actually concentrate on their work rather than it's too hot, too cold, too bright, too dark, whatever the case may be. Right, next slide. So like Dub mentioned, ESPC or EPC, it's also known as in a few places. It's been an incredibly resilient model. Again, it started in the late 70s, early 80s, through the mid 80s as, solar subsidies were being removed. In the mid 80s, ESPC kept going, right? During the Great Recession, when a lot of public agencies saw massive cuts to their budgets, ESPC kept going, right? Even when, interest rates were up, ESPC was still active, We got spoiled the past, 10, 12 years up until recently, having very low interest rates, and it helped really drive a lot more work in the ESPC business. But now that interest rates are higher, in some cases almost double what they were, during the pandemic, it's really coming back strong, right? Which we love to see. Another thing that's great about this, I call it a purple issue, right? It has bipartisan appeal because it's privately financed using private contractors to do public good. It's really, for me, it is the most effective public-private partnership that's out there. There's a lot of other P3s that, build toll roads and airport runways and that kind of thing. But a lot of it is depending on folks using that service, like toll roads in Texas, right? It kind of hasn't really resulted in what everyone had thought. With ESPC, virtually every single one of these perform, right? And really provide benefits to people who want to create local jobs, people who want to reduce emissions, people who want to just save money. It really appeals to everyone, regardless of your politics. I think supporting local economies is one of the greatest benefits to this. We saw this here. I've lived in Las Vegas now for 7 years. I started doing work here about 20 years ago. And in 2007 to 2012, the economy here was really bad, right? Really bad. And it created thousands and thousands of jobs here with folks who were just leaving the state because they couldn't get work, right? So it really made a huge difference. Um, it also ensures transparency through rigorous M&V, which again, that does not happen in design bid build. Even regular design build that a lot of states are starting to do now, there is no recourse for the owner if either mistakes are made or something just gets forgotten, right? It's not malicious, just a mistake was made. But with M&V and commissioning, it's built into ESPC. It really increases the quality of the projects, and ultimately it helps both the ESCOs and the owners at the end of the day, right? And it really reduces operating costs for MUSH market organizations. And everybody is at overburdened budgets, right? So if you can somehow figure out a way that you don't have to go and ask for more money to be able to save money out of your operating fund, it makes a huge difference. And the results we've seen, over the years, over $30 billion of this stuff has gotten done. It's probably actually higher than that. And it's been done through ESPs across 45 states. And we have a link there that goes to a NASIA website that goes through some of the history. So really think the budget neutral structure of this and the measurable results makes it a great politically neutral and fiscally responsible approach. Next slide. So one of the things that often gets overlooked in the MUSH market is that the role of state energy offices and DOE, right? DOE has been funding these state energy offices since the early 80s, right? When the Institutional Conservation Program was started, which is where I started my career back in 1985, doing energy audits and design and construction administration for schools and hospitals. And it started there, and they've been basically on a formula basis funding energy offices across the country now for 40, 45 years, right? And part of that has enabled these state energy offices to create their own ESPC programs, processes, sometimes contracts. I know in some states here about 10, 15 years ago, myself and others, Linda Smith, who started ESC originally, helped the state of Nevada get a $750,000 competitive grant from DOE that really created a robust program here in Nevada, right? And really made a huge difference. A lot of work was done. $100 million of work was done as a result of that grant. So a lot of things like that get done around the country. North Carolina partnered with nonprofits to address some of the legislative barriers that were in that state at the time. And we're able to really get out there and provide at least limited owners rep services. And 50, 60 projects were done from like 2008 to 2022 or so. Other states have provided technical assistance, oversight, registering of projects, education. A lot gets done in Colorado. Delaware's Sustainable Energy Utility has a really well-run, mature program. State of Georgia, GIFA, has a well-run program as well. New Mexico, it's got a great program where they are able to finance a lot of their own work through fees that are put onto the projects. Same with Virginia and Washington have energy offices that provide almost complete turnkey packages of oversight to owners. So there's a lot going on around the country. And these are just examples. It's not comprehensive. One of the other benefits, it gives great consistency to programs. If you have somebody at the state level who has at least responsibility for the states, right? And state agencies rather, and all states, well, not in all states provide that. Some of them are sort of precluded from working with local governments, but in a lot of states, they're able to help everybody, which is great. And it creates more consistency, not only for the owners, but for the ESCOs. So they don't have to go to a new town and it's done a different way, right? Or another agency, corrections does it differently than Health and Human Services, right? The more consistency you can provide, the smoother the program, the more profit at the end of the day for the ESCOs, which is great because then they can afford to go back and do more projects for the clients. And it makes it easier for the owners to be able to be confident and that they're doing something that is a tried and true program. They also provide financial support in some cases, right? There's not a lot of it around right now, as you could well imagine. But again, that varies depending on the economy. Actually, in a few weeks, we have a State of States webinar coming up on October 28th. We'd love for you all to take part in that. And it's going to go over in a lot more detail the role of state energy offices in this. And DOE leadership has been essential for many years, even through what's going on now with downsizing a lot of government agencies. There's still providing leadership. This ESPC campaign is still going along, providing training, webinars, technical assistance, and so on to agencies out there. Next slide. So the ESPC model we've seen now is resilient, right? It's been going on for 50 years. It's going to keep going just because of the way it's designed. It has enabled, especially in the past 10 years, where resilience has really become an issue as we started to see, the ravages of climate change really hit infrastructure badly, right? And it's been able to do this in a way that, like, electrification that's going on now, it's expensive, can't always get it all paid for. Resilience is sort of the same way. It's very expensive to put in gen sets and switch gear and all this to be able to do CHP. Solar and battery storage were almost unattainable 10, 15 years ago, and now they're in most projects that I see out there. So what are your resilience goals? And how can ESPC help achieve those goals? Next slide. So this is a great slide I got many years ago from my colleague Chris Lott's speech from when he worked at Rocky Mountain Institute. And it shows how virtually everywhere in the country, there's some sort of an issue you have to worry about, right? From natural disasters, whether they're earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, or tornadoes. And this hasn't been updated in years. I can tell you there's a lot more colors and a lot more of the states today. So in some cases, you kind of have the triple threat in many parts of the country. But it just shows that resilience is an important issue, and it's with us every single day. Next slide. So how do you protect your critical infrastructure, right? There's all these hazards out there. Black sky hazard, is the worst one, a catastrophic event that severely disrupts critical infrastructure in multiple regions for long durations, right? This is everything from these, atmospheric rivers we saw a year ago out west. Some of these hurricanes which just, sat over North Carolina and destroyed hundreds of buildings. Same thing up in New England, 10, 12 years ago, Vermont just got devastated. A whole state got devastated by these storms. And we have a few pictures here. This is from the Valentine's Day freeze in Texas a few years ago. You've had continued to have problems in Texas with power outages and so on. The next one is the fires in Marin County across the bay from San Francisco. And we all know what's going on with fires out west here. And even, back east where I grew up on Eastern Long Island in New York, there were fires in the winter last year. It's just crazy. And then flooding in Asheville in that bottom picture. And we've seen that all throughout this summer, right? Terrible floods all over. So this is not going away, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. And our buildings and our infrastructure need to be prepared to handle it. Next slide. So most people out there, when they think of resilience, are thinking about how do we make our buildings more resilient? And that's really where ESPC has the most effect. Improve infrastructure, do equipment upgrades like we saw after Superstorm Sandy in the Northeast in 2010 or 11. We figured out there were a lot of like boilers and switchgear in basements of building that were 5 feet above sea level, right? And so when that 12, 15-foot storm surge came in, it just destroyed hundreds of millions of dollars worth of gear, right? And some folks were like, let's move this stuff upstairs, right? You put it on the second floor, right? Just one example of doing things like that where ESPC can provide resilience. And if you can make your facilities resilient, you help the grid be more resilient, right? You can help avoid outages by reducing your demand just by, turning things off or reducing temperatures. You can contribute through demand response, like really having sophisticated controls. We'll talk about that some more, or islanding. Like I worked at, and they were able to take 40 megawatts of load off the grid, right? That was huge, right? That's huge during storms and so on. What ESPC can also do, it's a little more intangible, but organizational resilience internally by improving the economics and well-being of organizations, right? Saving money, getting rid of, equipment that's been bugging everybody for 20 years. That just never works in the peak summer days or the peak winter days, fixing chronic problems and all that kind of stuff. In some cases, being able to provide funding for a full-time energy manager, a full-time O&M person who focuses on this kind of stuff. And I worked on a few projects like that over the years, and it was great. And it can also extend to community resilience. We've seen that in some projects where they're able to basically make the police station not only up and running during storms, but you could actually welcome folks in from the community to charge your laptops, cell phones, and whatnot, right? So there's a lot of ways to do this. Next slide. So facility resilience and energy management, right? I see this through using various energy management strategies, including whole systems thinking and an integrative design approach. People are probably looking at, why does Chris have these B-2 bombers in a sense, right? And that is because those bombers, right, have the most advanced stealth technology in the world. And on radar to our enemies, they look like seagulls, right? And I like to use that analogy for buildings where if you can take your electric footprint or your energy footprint and reduce it, similar to what these huge aircraft do with the radar and their stealth technology, reduce your energy footprint, you go a long way towards making yourself more resilient, right? Just like these do to enemy aircraft. And you can mitigate future risks, right? The first thing you want to do with this is reduce the loads, right? Just reduce everything you're using in those buildings or streetlights or whatever the case may be. Then try to make it more controllable, right? By adding controls, putting in your own self-generation. It used to be a lot of combined heat and power, natural gas and diesel fired. That's quickly being replaced by solar and battery storage, battery energy storage systems. And ultimately doing sophisticated demand response, where you can do it manually or you can do automated demand response, which we could do a whole webinar just on that in the future. But that is really, for me, the key to how you make facilities more resilient. Next slide. So this whole systems thinking, right, is thinking about outcome first, right? And how do all these systems really work together? So don't just do lighting, right? And then put solar on the roof, right? Because you're overbuying solar because your HVAC system is still oversized, right? It's still using way too much energy. Optimize your lighting, HVAC, and your building envelope to lower your energy demand, right? That's the first thing you want to do. Once you've done that, you can, again, reduce that load. Say you had a 500 kW building, reduce that to 300 kW load. You only need 300 kW or less of solar. Instead of buying 300 to 500, now you only have to buy 100 to 200, right? So you can save a huge amount. On solar is still expensive. It's a lot cheaper than it used to be, but it's still expensive on a per kW basis compared to efficiency. Right, so that's the first thing you want to do. Next, you want to electrify your building as much as you can. Like I mentioned at the beginning, electrification can be extraordinarily expensive. Removing fossil fuel boilers and putting in electric boilers or heat pumps is often untenable in many places, right? But you do it where you can, taking things out that are fossil fuel fired, putting in heat pumps, for example. Use that for space conditioning and water heating. When you do that, you really have to think about your electrical system. Many buildings that were built a long time ago aren't designed to have that size of an electrical system in the building. So that sometimes has to be upgraded, which can be very, very expensive. And ultimately enabling demand response, right? The more you can vary your load and make it match the peaks of the grid so that at the highest price and the most stress on the grid during the day, which seems to be late afternoon to early evenings, depending on where you are, the more you can cut that load off, the better off your facilities are, better off groups. First thing to do is install an energy management system or smart thermostats if you don't have a big energy management system, and just do minor temperature adjustments during the grid's peak. You can also put in variable frequency drives on large motors. So we used to put them in just to basically vary variable or volume systems. Now you can use them pretty much anytime, especially during peak loads. And for small fractional horsepower motors, use ECM motors or electrically commutated motors. All of this will reduce your peak load and dependence on your photovoltaics and BESS, right? And if you have diesel generators, you can extend the life of that diesel that you often can't get in the aftermath of a storm, right? So a lot of these things really work together. And then if you have demand response programs in your utility area, and almost all utilities have these now, join them and you can get revenue. I had clients in the past who were getting $10,000 every summer back because they were able to participate in demand response. Next slide. So this integrative design approach, it's really thinking about everything from a comprehensive, holistic uh, system base, much like whole system thinking, and then integrating things all at the same time. Like I talked about before, once you can minimize those loads, you can right size the design and installation of the solar PV. I've seen tons of money saved, and that improves the economics of your whole project and maybe allows you to put in another type of measure, right? When your ESCO is on board, they're going to evaluate all of this stuff anyway. But once you get to solar and battery storage, they're going to be looking at exactly how your 15-minute, 5-minute load profile varies throughout the day, seasonally, and so on, especially your peak usage, right? That's really where the battery energy storage can come into play. And whether you're on time of use utility rates or not. In some cases, some utilities still charge folks on basically a set dollars per kilowatt across the, and you can switch the time of use and get that benefit. Much like folks do this in their homes and drive an electric car and use it every day, they can then do time of use rates at their house and charge their car at night for half the cost of what they would if they did it during the day. And ultimately, do all of this together. And this graphic shows how it's all tied together, but optimize your balance of power, right? How much are you getting from your PV arrays? When and how much are you charging and discharging of your battery energy storage system? This is another topic. I was thinking we'd do a whole webinar just on this because there's so much to it. It's extremely complicated and all the bugs haven't quite been worked out in a lot of ways. And it needs a lot of attention to detail when you're putting this together from the beginning and as well as during the performance period of a performance contract. And how much ultimately is being delivered to the building, what's not being used at any time during the day gets returned to the grid as excess power, and trying to make sure you're using net metering to bring as much of that value back to your facility as possible. And we've seen sort of that the heyday of net metering, and in a lot of states now are trying to pull that back under pressure from electric utilities. But I don't think the game is quite over yet on that topic. Next slide. Ultimately, creating microgrids really is where we all need to go. Distributed energy resources or distributed renewable energy resources, really. And this has been started probably about 12, 15 years ago, once we really start to see a lot of these terrible storms happening one after another, as opposed to once every 2, 5, 10, 20 years. And I'm not going to read all this, but it basically allows you with, say you're a school building, you can literally electrically wire your building to the police station, right, to the fire department, to an EMS station, and be able to island ultimately so that if the grid goes down around you due to whatever the problem is, you keep everything up and running, right? And this is magic to a local or regional grid. The more megawatts you can take off that grid, the less stress there is on the grid as they're trying to get everything back up and running across the grid. So it's probably for me, like I said, the ultimate expression of resilience for facilities where you can get yourself to the point of having a microgrid and really be able to island. Next slide. And like I said, doing that on an individual building and local building area network really can provide resilience to the overall grid, right? But in a microgrid, you can ultimately remove yourself from the grid, right? And this helps you avoid outages. Just like, peak summer days, you get calls from utilities saying, oh, it's 110, at least here in Las Vegas. This year we were lucky, only hit 110 once, but last summer we hit it 15 days in a row, right? So the electric utility was calling for people to reduce their temperatures, increase their cooling temperatures, right, constantly. You can use energy efficiency and controls to just reduce demand, nothing sophisticated even. Again, you can just reset your building automation system to, cool to 74 for a few hours in the afternoon as opposed to 72. No one really notices it, and you avoid perhaps your buildings being suffering brownout. And then demand response, which you can really help contribute to the grid. If you can, again, use your temperature control system, your variable frequency drives, and other things that you have the ability to vary load with, and you can shape that load. You can deliver that sort of bandwidth, if you will, back to the grid so they can send that precious energy that's in short supply during stressful times on the grid to other customers who may need it. Next slide. So economic and organizational resilience, the way we think about it, and, Jamie was super helpful on this, what you can provide is stable savings, right? And again, with most performance contracts, that's guaranteed savings year after year after year, usually 10 to 20, even 25 years. It makes for predictable budgeting. That's one thing we have seen, right, from the pandemic to now. Budgeting has been a nightmare, right? So this helps alleviate some of that burden that's on budgeting folks. And it really addresses deferred maintenance, which again, you end up with emergency repairs at the worst time of day, the worst time of year. This really can help. It can also free up money. Like there's a school district here in Las Vegas that's doing a big project right now. They used cash to pay for it, and every dollar saved goes back to their operating fund that they can use to pay for more teachers, more technology, and so on. Right? That's super, super helpful to a lot of agencies. It also improves indoor air quality and lighting. Again, we had studies done 20 years ago for LEED buildings that showed that kids' performance in LEED certified buildings, and in this case, performance contracts more or less turn buildings into sort of LEED enabled buildings. Their test scores increased by 10 to 15%, right? So that's huge. And less time spent on changing lights and maintenance means more time for other things. Allow maintenance people to do predictive maintenance versus putting out fires all day long. Next slide. So hopefully, if you can do this enough in your building, you can then spread this to your community, including enhancing social equity, community safety, improved health and well-being. I've worked on projects in some states and local governments, where like in Boston, they were able to put all new street lighting in with controls that can flash for means of egress during a storm. This road is flooded, take that road instead, right? And state of North Carolina did this street lighting, and they were able to, the light fixtures told central controls when it was out, instead of this creating a safety issue on a highway, right? You're able to really help. And in, certain areas, there's modules you can put on streetlights that sniff smoke, hear gunshots, whatever the case may be, right? So it really can be helpful in a lot of ways. Improving air quality, just, reducing the amount of combustion fumes that go into the air in local areas really can lead to better health. And for me, one of the most important ones is take those lessons learned when you're doing this at your city buildings and your school buildings, get it out into the community, right? Hold, seminars in the gym, right? Or do online webinars for local folks so they can see how to do it in their homes and their businesses. For me, that's the best thing I can see done to help community resilience, because everyone would love to know more about it, but there aren't a lot of resources out there for this. It also helps with workforce development, as I mentioned earlier, really providing a ton of local jobs, and provides economic development because you're putting people to work, but you're also buying equipment locally in most places, either the city that you live in or in the state or county that you're in. Next slide. So to really maximize the benefits of all of this, the first thing to think about is integrating resilience into your project goals, right? Usually performance contracts are done because stuff is old and needs to get replaced, or our electric bills and gas bills have just gone sky high. We really need to do something about it, right? Or our deferred maintenance has become, $2 billion. So when you're putting those initial objectives out there, hopefully you get yourself an owner's rep who can help you as an owner think through all these things before you put out an RFP to the ESCO community, so your objectives are made clear. If you include resilience at the very beginning, the ESCOs are going to know, okay, we need to put that into our tool bag when we're responding to an RFP, right? And then the more you do that earlier, the better off your project is going to be in the long run. You want to have your ESCO conduct comprehensive assessments so that you can do a thorough analysis of all your community assets and vulnerabilities. There's usually a ton of vulnerabilities out there. And if you have, say, schools that are designated places of refuge, if you have just, say, a diesel-fired backup generator, half the time they don't work. when they're needed, right? We saw that with Superstorm Sandy. More than half the generators did not work. And as we saw in some places up in the Northeast during some storms, so many trees came down, you could not get diesel to schools and hospitals. Just, you know, bottlenecks in the roadway network didn't allow it to get there. So figuring all these things out early on makes a huge difference. And getting the community involved. I was reading about a project yesterday up in Chelsea, Massachusetts, where they, from a grassroots level, were able to get the whole community involved and turned it into a project. It's great. And really explore alternative financing, right? There had been a lot of financing available for FEMA for this sort of stuff called a BRIC, Building Resilience Infrastructure funding. And that has been cut, unfortunately, but there's still money out there that's waiting to pay for these sort of things. Use as much of the Department of Energy's toolkits and so on as you can. There's tons of them out there. We have some links at the end of this presentation. And ensure strong contract provisions. Like I mentioned earlier, strong M&V protocols, strong commissioning protocols, especially when you're doing resilience projects like combined heat and power or solar and battery storage. Right? There's a lot of moving parts to moving the power around these buildings and getting them out to the grid and moving the power back to your buildings. Right? There's a lot there. You want to make sure you and your ESCO are in lockstep on that, not just from an expectations and objectives perspective, but contractually. Because people move. I did this for an ESCO in the 90s, and somebody is gone, right? They quit or whatever. You can lose a lot of institutional knowledge that way. So you want to make sure there's something in the contract that everybody can take a look at. And lastly, I mentioned this before, share with the community, inform the public about what's going on. And again, the more you tell the public about this, the more buy-in you're going to get, really. And it helps build trust and demonstrates the value of using a budget neutral mechanism. Next slide. So we have a couple of examples. This is one that we got from Amoresco that's from City of Pendleton, Oregon. So they started with doing over 1,000 streetlights, cutting energy use by over 50% using energy as a service financing, right? Which we're seeing is becoming more and more common, especially with streetlights and other things like that that are single technology. Phase 2 is a solar canopy, about a quarter of a megawatt solar at the water treatment facility, which improved the water quality and used ESPC, but also some state and federal and city incentives to do that. And, most people don't recognize this until there's severe flooding at the wastewater treatment plants in their towns. They're the largest energy user in virtually every town in this country, and they're incredibly vulnerable. They're usually situated on a river or on a lake or on an ocean because they have to send that water out somewhere that once it's treated. And so they're subject to flooding, right? So it's really important to be able to measure wastewater treatment plants. Water treatment plants and wastewater treatment plants get a lot of attention in ESPC. Phase 3 is putting in battery storage and microgrids. One of the reasons I like this case study is because you built up over time. You can't always afford to do everything all at once, or you don't have the bandwidth to do everything all at once. So do the stuff that you can do first, and then in some cases make something, solar ready. You can put solar in, but you can't afford battery storage. Make sure it's battery storage ready. So when you come back in a year or two, it's a lot easier to go and just add those extra technologies into the buildings. So in this case, they were able to reduce utility costs. Long-term ROI was improved, and it was budget neutral. Saved a ton of CO2, less maintenance, multiple renewable technologies, and protected the aquatic ecosystem, right? Again, absolutely key. Nothing to do with energy, but has everything to do with community health, right? Which is the single most important thing out there. And really improved, lighting, resource recovery, and local leadership and sustainability. Next slide. This is one from we got from ESG and the Colorado Energy Office, a city of Telluride. It's very famous for skiing and movie stars, of course, as everyone knows. They also have a great mushroom festival every summer. But it's up in the Rocky Mountains, right? At like 10, 12,000 feet, right? This is not an easy place to keep buildings running, right? And there's a lot of historic buildings there. elementary school is 150 years old, right? So it's subject to national register requirements. And they're able to, think this through intelligently, work together as a team, and do everything from LED lighting, uh, upgrade snow melt controls, right, which is huge thing in the mountains. Added PV to do on-site renewable energy. Um, reduce the energy cost by utilizing battery storage to offset the peak demand charges. Like I was saying earlier, this is all stuff that can contribute to the grid. And Western Colorado, there's a lot of snow, a lot of big storms in the winter, and the grid is really stressed during the winter. There's a lot of electric heat still there. So this is hugely important for this region of the country. And they were able to install EV charging stations for visitors and staff, which is an extra benefit, um, and also upgraded transformers. Again, all of these things contributed to reducing loads, making everything more variable and manageable, and being able to control your power on and off the grid. And it really helped to be able to do this. And in a place with historic character, they also improved building envelope, which again, that's one of those things, it's sort of a static project, but it really helps because it reduces the amount of heating and cooling you need to do, and thus electricity and fossil fuels and whatever else. It also repaired and replaced roofs that are, they're going to be there for 40 years, an improvement that's going to be there for 40, 50 years. Next slide. This last one is a federal project. I won't go into this in a lot of detail. This is one from DLA, Defense Logistics Agency, that Ameresco was the ESCO, NV5 was the owner's rep on this, or project facilitator as it's known in the federal world. And one of the things I liked about this is when I used to work on this many years ago, mission assurance through energy assurance from Mark Carell, as a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force. For me, it not only applied to the military, but to everywhere, regardless of what your mission is, whether it's healing the sick, teaching, whatever it might be. If you can't keep your buildings running, your infrastructure running to keep your mission on, that's where you need to do something, right? And the more assurance you have in your energy chain, right, the more assurance you have in your mission chain. So this is a great project, 900 buildings, 5 bases. What it did was reduce the loads. It reduced the energy use by almost 25% and added 20 megawatts of PV and CHP. So, it was able to use fossil fuels and this is in Texas, right, where they're actually drilling there. So it's not sending in a pipeline across the country. It's really a way to combine natural gas and solar and battery storage all in one place. So it really improved the energy security there. Next slide. And these are some more of the details, right? Hundreds of thousands of lamps, thermal storage, which is another technology that's been around since I've been in this business 40 years, that really should be getting a greater look these days. And a lot of controls is put in. So you can see a lot of this is all stuff that I talked about earlier in the presentation. And if you can do it across 4 different military bases over 2 different commands, you can do it anywhere. Next slide. Next. So one of the things that we offer through the ESPC campaign is this direct technical assistance. And we used to call it office hours, but we're really able to help any state or local government agency, school district, town, anybody in the MUSH market. Just, click on that link. We'll set up a call. We can go through and talk about anything you want to talk about having to do, whether it's you have a program, if you're a state agency, you're running a program, or you're thinking about joining a program, or you have a project you're thinking of doing, you're not really sure how to start, or you're in the middle of a project and you have some questions, or you've had a project done and you're getting these annual review reports and you can't make heads or tails of them, give us a call and we can help you out, right? We're not going to be like your full-time owner's rep, but we can help you get on the right track and even help you find owner's reps that can help you through the rest of your project. Here, Miracle Wilson, who's the Energy Resource Project Manager for GFA, participated in a few of our events and really had a lot of nice things to say. They were able to implement their eProject Express platform, and it really took, sort of projects that they had some information in a lot of different places and put it all in one location where they can sort, do reports, everything else. And it was a huge help to them. Next slide. So we have some other things coming up here. Ally in Your Corner, working with owners reps. This is a webinar we're doing on the 16th. We're going to have a couple of owners rep firms as guest speakers. Using Project Express to track and report legacy project data. We just talked about for Georgia and how LBL can help you do this. And again, we don't have time to get into it now, but everybody that's thinking about doing a performance contract or doing one should be using EPX. I wish I had this 15, 20 years ago when I was doing this full time. It really helps keep all that data in one place. And again, it doesn't matter if somebody moves on to another job, everything is there and available. And then State of States, you mentioned earlier. So please join us for these. We'd really love to see you there. And then our colleagues at NAESCO is having their annual R3 conference here in Las Vegas. Please come down and join us first week of November. Next slide. So the ESPC, we're kind of running out of time here. It's a great program that Department of Energy is making available to pretty much everybody in the MUSH market, both on the public side and on the developer supporters from, everything from lighting contractors, ESCOs, and controls contractors on down. A lot of trainings, webinars, peer exchanges, these office hours, technical assistance we talked about, and an extensive resource library. Also, we're looking for a lot of case studies, right? We don't have as many as we'd like. Just click on that link on the bottom right-hand corner. And if you're interested in joining, we'd love to have more people involved in this. Just click on that other link for the expression of interest form. Next slide. That is all we have. So on behalf of Dub, Jamie, and I, and Sean Williamson, our POC at Department of Energy, I thank you all for joining. Do we have any?